fellow gastronomes, and welcome to Dirty Belly, where we take you on a journey as your food goes from dirt to your belly. I am your host, a dad who loves to eat and grow, Jeff Sims. I am here today without our resident culinarian, Matthew Gaddis, who I think he lost a leg in a boating accident.
I heard his leg came off.
It may not actually be that serious, but he's hurt somewhere. And it's not just his feelings. So,
Matt doesn't have any legs.
to replace him today, coming to us from the ether, he's uh he's become solid for us, Mr. Will Gray.
Hi, Jeff.
There you go. I was wondering if you were going to say
How are you?
hi.
I
um,
For those of you who haven't seen Botch Spots and Share Shots, and there's a 99% chance if you're watching on this network you have, I'm a chef by trade and a mark by choice. I am the Will Gray. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
you're welcome. It's good to have you here. Thank you for hosting our little show and filling in for us when we're hurt or at Disney World, like I will be in a few weeks.
In which
That's
case, Matt's going to host, and I'm going to sit in his seat again.
That's what I've been spending my morning doing is planning a trip to Disney World and packing, which if you've never been to Disney World, it's the most intensive planning process you'll ever do for a vacation.
I've never been to Disney, but I'm not exactly sure that I'm sold on the idea that I actually want to go to Disney now at almost 38 years old. I don't know if that's something I want to do.
I took my first trip in my 30s. Well, actually, I went when I was a little kid, but I took my first like trip that I remember in my 30s, and I loved it as an adult. But it's not for everybody. I get that. We love it. We go almost every year to some Disney, either Disneyland or Disney World. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about macaroni and cheese. This is serious business. Okay.
Serious business.
I mean, you thought we took collard greens seriously. You thought we took fried chicken seriously. Everybody takes mac and cheese seriously. Okay.
It's super serious.
Actually, there are some people who don't like mac and cheese, and I don't know why. I've never understood that. I mean, it's pasta and cheese, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is macaroni and cheese? Will?
Uh, to me personally, and we were kind of getting into this beforehand, when I think macaroni and cheese, I think pasta, cheese sauce. Macaroni is one of those, like when somebody says they want a Coke, and you're like, okay, what flavor of Coke? When somebody says they want macaroni, I assume it's any non like stringed noodle based pasta. So that's your panes and your ziti's and your actual elbow macaronis. Like I think it's any extruded pasta when I think macaroni and cheese.
Isn't spaghetti an extruded pasta though?
Well, technically, but it's like the elongated noodle. Like I
Yeah,
can't say noodle pasta because all pasta is a noodle. But
yeah.
when I think
The little
like
baby noodles.
yeah, they all come through extruders by term and like a die. But when I think of like noodles that are put, when I think the noodles that are put through an extruder, I think of the ones that you can't just make by rolling through a pasta machine. Because you can take a hand twisted pasta machine and roll your spaghetti and fettuccine and linguine and everything out. You can't hook up my pasta maker downstairs and make penne with it.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
I
It
get
takes
that.
a different machine to make
Yeah,
these types of noodles. You knew
yeah.
that, but maybe the fans did because they're monsters. They are monsters, Al.
That's okay. They're monsters because they're hungry, and we're here to satiate them. Actually, this will
Satiate.
probably make you even hungrier. But for me, just like you said, a corn tortilla isn't cornbread. This is something that I'm a stickler on. Macaroni and cheese has to be macaroni noodles. Now, otherwise, it's a pasta and cheese.
For
But
sure.
that's a personal thing. If somebody calls ziti with cheese, macaroni and cheese, I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm going to eat it. And if it's delicious, I'm going to tell them. And if it's bad, I'm just going to shut my mouth and eat it. Okay, Um, what's the best thing you ate this week, Will?
What's the best thing that I ate this week? Um, I didn't really like. I've been going through these really weird phases with food where I'm either really hungry, where I'll like pound everything, or I have zero appetite. This week's been kind of a slow week for me, appetite wise. I ate my standards. I made a really good cheeseburger. I had some really good pizza. I had some sushi last week that was really good. So, I mean, some standard foods. I didn't go out this week, though. Like, I didn't go sit down at a restaurant and have dinner, but I made some good food at the house.
Yeah, the one time I went out this week is I had a Costco hot dog, so I don't think any of that counts. But I did cook up a bunch of blackened mahi mahi, which I really enjoy. Um, Always try to pair it with a salad or a vegetable, and some roasted potatoes is usually good. I've been eating too much rice, so I went with some potatoes. The key with a good piece of mahi really is you need to brine it. A lot of people don't think about brining a fish, but if you do brine your fish, you want to brine it a lot less than you would a chicken, but it'll really make it super moist. If you ever had dry fish, it sucks, and you know that. And this is kind of like a guarantee that it won't be dry, even if you're not a chef that can cook it perfectly every time. Brining it will really help and adds a lot of flavor to it. But that was probably my best meal, and I made a little for my son too. It's one of the few meats that he'll actually eat, which I don't know. He thinks he's a shark, so he's always like, "Is this the big red eye fish that sharks eat?" Yeah, it's whatever you want it to be, dude. If you eat it,
That's exactly what it
So
is.
yeah, I don't, don't mess with me, man. You know what I mean? Like whatever you think it is, it gets you to eat it. That's what it is. Okay.
It can be whatever you need it to be.
Back to macaroni and cheese. The reason we're here today. Macaroni and cheese. Most people, when they think of the history of macaroni and cheese, especially in America, that I think a lot of them probably think about the great Italian immigration, and think that that's probably where it came over, uh, around 1900. But actually, that's not true. Um, while pasta and cheese did probably originate in Italy, our first recipe for pasta and cheese is a Parmesan and pasta recipe from the 14th century. I would not consider that mac and cheese, but it is cheese and pasta. Um, Actually, macaroni was first brought to the United States by none other than Thomas Jefferson, known by many as the Sage of Monticello. But I personally call him Tommy Macaroni
Tommy
because
Macaroni.
because this man loved his macaroni. He first encountered macaroni sometime in the 18th century in either Paris, France, or Naples, Italy, while he was over there doing some business. Came back, loved it, said talking to everybody about it, saying, "Hey, macaroni, it's the stuff, man, especially with cheese." In 1973, he even commissioned a U.S. ambassador to France, William Short, who I like to call Tiny Bill, to purchase a machine for making macaroni and bring it back to America.
So we bought an extruder.
I, you know,
1973.
he actually called it a macaroni mold, which is probably why it wasn't very successful, right? Because we know it wasn't a good machine because Thomas Jefferson continued to import his macaroni after he bought the machine. So and he called it a macaroni mold, which I don't know. Molded pasta is probably more like a gnocchi or something. You know what I mean? It's not going to be what you would think of as macaroni with the hole through the center of it, because macaroni is extruded with a hole in the center. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But you're not going to make great macaroni with a mold. It's just not going to happen.
No.
And thanks to Thomas Jefferson coming back to America, loving macaroni, importing it, serving it to all of his dinner guests, it quickly became very popular in the upper class in the northeast of America. And they all began to import macaroni as well from Italy. And, we're talking about the Pennsylvania, New York area, right? And when he moves back to Virginia after being president, he was so concerned about the lack of macaroni that he wrote a series of letters to a local food distributor, Gordon Trokes and Company, dismayed about the lack of macaroni. I mean, we're talking about this guy wrote multiple letters to someone to try to get macaroni sent to his home state. He loved the stuff, and I can't blame him personally.
I love mac and cheese. I would write, to get it. If I was the president and I had that kind of power. And it plus, we're looking at 1793, 1773. There's not a lot. We finished the American Revolution. The Civil War doesn't pop off for another 100 years. War of 1812 is what, 30, 40 years away now. Like, he was probably bored as shit in the White House. Like, he was just looking for stuff to do. So he was like, let's get a macaroni extruder. Let's start diplomatic affairs with Italy just over mac and cheese.
How far would you go to get your favorite food when you move back home somewhere or when you move somewhere else? I think a lot of people would pay a premium, and he did use his influence to get it imported to his state. Unfortunately, he did not live long enough to see the first pasta factory opened in the United States. It was opened in 1848 by Antoine Zarega in Brooklyn, New York, and that
That's a
company,
name.
yeah, and that company still exists, Zarega Pasta. So you can buy pasta from that company. It was sold out of the family sometime in the 20th century to a Pennsylvania pasta company. So it is no longer family owned as it once was, but the company name still exists. And not coincidentally, I think personally, the first cheese factory was opened 3 years later. So, we had the pasta. We're finally getting our own American made pasta. What do you need next? You got to have cheese. 3 years later, some smart businessman said, we're going to start making it right here. And that is really the moment where mac and cheese begins to become a popular dish amongst everyone. Before that, it was kind of seen as a highbrow, snooty food because it was expensive, right? Uh, Cheese wasn't cheap, and the macaroni, especially being imported from Italy, was not cheap. But with the introduction of the industrialization process and pasta and cheese factories opening up, everybody started to eat it. And now I would say it's, right up there with fried chicken. It's one of the most popular dishes to be served, probably even more popular than fried chicken. I mean, what holidays is mac and cheese not served on in America?
No, you're right. It's served at every major meal or function. It's that go-to. When I think potluck sides, you almost guarantee somebody's bringing a mac and cheese or baked mac and cheese or some variation of a mac and cheese. It's like, you're right. It's up there with fried chicken or deviled eggs or potato salad. Like it's one of those standard picnic sides that go with everything.
And a lot of times people want to know before they come to your party who's bringing the mac and cheese. Because if the wrong person's bringing the mac and cheese, I might not show up. You know
It's
what I'm
just
saying?
like it.
Like,
Yeah.
because it's a serious thing, right? And you got to make it right. And everybody's very personal about how they like their mac and cheese.
That's a conversation right there. Like that could be the whole episode is just discussing preparation and how we do it.
Well, let me hear from you first. What goes in your mac and cheese? And then I'll tell you what I like to put in my mac and cheese.
Like when we were starting and we were just going off, I asked you, I was like, are you one of the type of people that would believe mac and cheese is any noodle as long as it's in a cheese based sauce? And like when you look at it, it's kind of the tortilla versus cornbread thing. Like Casio e pepe, like it literally is just cheese and pepper. It's Parmesan cheese, olive oil, pepper, and that olive oil melts that like compresses that Parmesan cheese, and it makes the emulsification that wraps your noodles, and it's cracked black pepper. In a sense, that's mac and cheese because it's just a cheese sauce and noodles. It's not like the stringy cream and milk and roux that you think of in America, but ultimately it's just cheese and noodles and seasoning, which is at the core and base what mac and cheese is. When I start mine, I bake my mac and cheese. So I use a thicker noodle or something that's got a little bit more body to it. So I use, when I make my mac and cheese, I use penne noodles. I'll use a ziti. I very seldom ever use an elbow macaroni. I also don't overcook my pasta. My pasta always comes out. If you bite into a piece of penne and you're like, this is almost done, and you look at it and there's that little white ring of uncooked pasta starch in the center, that's almost where you want to pull your mac and cheese for my mac and cheese recipe. Because once you make your sauce and it finishes cooking in that sauce and then bakes in the oven, it's going to finish cooking with all that flavor around it versus just finish cooking in the water. Jeff, I know you can attest for this. A lot of people don't realize your pasta will only season during the cooking process. Once you stop that cooking process and start heating it a second time, you don't add any more flavor or seasoning to your pasta at that point. So you only get it in that initial cook. So I go straight from water into my cheese sauce and then ready to bake. That way it never stops the cooking process all the way till the end.
Wow, that's awesome. And you answered a couple questions I'm going to ask later, but we're going to ask them anyways because they're important questions. And I think you offered a lot of valuable information there. What goes in my mac and cheese? First of all, we're starting with a bechamel. If you don't know what a bechamel is, it is a roux plus milk sauce. Very simple. Some people put nutmeg in it, a little salt and pepper, stuff like that, dry mustard. If I'm making a Macaroni and cheese, I'll use 1 cup of roux, which will be 8 tablespoons of flour, 8 tablespoons of butter. Melt your butter, add your flour, keep it over the heat, stir it until it gets nice and thick. I'll pour in 4 cups of milk, about medium heat. Keep stirring that. You don't want to scorch your milk, but basically the roux is going to thicken the milk until it's almost like a light gravy kind of consistency. I'm going to add a little bit of dry mustard and salt, probably 2 tablespoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of dried mustard. And then here comes the fun part. Here comes my cheese. Now I'm very simple on my mac and cheese. If I'm going to make it just a normal mac and cheese, or especially a mac and cheese for a party, I'm not going to do anything really crazy, because if you do mac and cheese the right way, people are going to be really impressed with it anyway. So I'm just going to go 3 cups of cheddar, 1 cup of pecorino romano. The cheddar for your classic yellow look, a nice sharp flavor to it. Pecorino Romano really just adds just that super cheesy flavor. That's what's gonna, and this is a secret to making anything really cheesy, is if you add some Parmesan or Pecorino Romano is my personal favorite, like super dry, oily cheese. It really just packs a real punch where you can add a little bit of it and adds a ton of flavor, and it's gonna make your sauce taste, yeah, gonna make your sauce taste really, really cheesy. Now I would not use these without the roux. Some people make their mac and cheese without bechamel. They'll just use milk and cheese. I would not use these two cheeses for that, because they're both oily cheeses and they tend to separate when they melt. And what the bechamel does some things to prevent that, which we'll talk about later. And then I'm going to mix that with a pound of macaroni. Of course, I'm talking dry. I'm gonna boil it in some very salted water, because, as Will was saying, this is the only time you're going to be able to add flavor to your noodle is while it's cooking. And for me personally, it's going to be very al dente when I pull it out, because I'm going to finish it in the oven. I personally like to top mine with a little bit of panko breadcrumb, give it a little crispy crunch on top. I've seen a lot of different stuff that people put on the top. You can just put cheese, that's fine. You can put panko breadcrumbs. I've seen people use crumbled up Ritz crackers,
I was
which
about
I
to
thought was,
say, I
yeah.
do Ritz crackers, Parmesan cheese, and butter in mine is what I put on my crumble top.
Yeah, Alice in Wonderland makes a good point. She says that her ex mother in law let her make mac and cheese one Thanksgiving, and everyone liked hers better than her mother in law's, so she was not allowed to make it ever again. Be careful, because you can step on people's toes with things like mac and cheese and potato salad, because people are very proud of theirs, and when you outdo them, they're gonna be a little salty.
Those are those like traditions.
They're gonna be salty like your pasta water should be.
Yes.
But yeah, you can add whatever you want on top that's crunchy, right? Just something to add a little texture to it, because it's a very creamy dish. So when we're talking about macaroni and cheese, there's a few questions that I really do want to go a little more depth into. First of all, should you overcook your noodles? This is something I've seen a lot of people do, where they take their noodles to the point of being soggy. It was explained to me once that, well, when you put them in there, it's going to soak up the cheese sauce, which will make it dry. What do you think, Will?
I 100%, like I was saying in my process when I was talking about cooking my noodles, I never overcook them because I have, at minimum, after you boil your noodles, at least one more cooking step. And then if I'm making, especially in a commercial kitchen, if I'm making my mac and cheese for like commercial use, it's going to hit the oven too to bake on the topping. When we would do it for banquets, we had two very different trains of thought. We would make the big pan of mac and cheese. We'd put the crumble on top, and then we would bake it so it would get golden, delicious, and brown and crumbly and all of that. It was perfect. When we would do it for service in the restaurant, and we were doing like a la minute preparation, like cooking on the fly, we would have par cooked noodles, the cheese sauce, and a double boil staying warm, and then the cookie crumble and just a Cambro. And my saute cook had the warm his noodles, add his cheese sauce, put them in the cast iron, top it, and then it would go on the broiler to finish cooking, because it would come out like a little baby individual served mac and cheese instead of like the whole pan. So I always undercook the noodles, even more so than if it was just going in the sauce and then on a plate. I would, like I said, it would really al dente, because they're going to finish cooking in the sauce and then once more go into a 700-degree broiler to char the top and get the crusty brown on top. So I would always say there's almost no situation, in my opinion, when it comes to mac and cheese where you want to overcook your noodles. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, and this is, I think, one of the most common mistakes I think people make with their macaroni and cheese is they do overcook their noodles, and I think that's the easiest way to get to a bland, watery. Because think about it this way: when you're boiling your noodles, what are you doing? They're soaking up water, right? So the longer you cook them and the softer they get, the more water that's going to be in your macaroni and cheese. But that's not what we want. We want cheese in our macaroni and cheese. So I do agree that they will soak up some of the liquid from the macaroni from the cheese sauce that you put in there, but I fix that by adding a little more cheese sauce. When my macaroni and cheese goes in the pan before it goes in the oven, it's going to be a little loosey goosey. You know what I mean? It's going to have a little shake and jiggle to it. All right, and I think when people do overcook their macaroni, they're trying to prevent some problems, but they're creating even bigger problems at the same time. And when you do like Will said, finish it cooking in the cheese sauce, it's going to make the noodles have a little bit of cheese flavor as well. They're going to soak up some of that milk, soak up some of that oil from the cheese, and it's going to make them taste even better. And I think that's the best way to get to a great mac and cheese is to stop it at the most cooked at al dente, and like Will said, maybe even just a little bit before that if you're going to have a long baking time. And I don't like when I serve my mac and cheese. I don't like my macaroni to look swelled up at all. I like it to look at the basic al dente size, which is not much bigger than how it comes out of the box. Do you have to use a bechamel, Will?
Okay, this is one of those like, do I use a bechamel? Absolutely every time. I didn't tell you my cheeses, by the way. I realized that when I just talked about cooking noodles and completely left my sauce out. I agree. I use an extra sharp cheddar cheese. There's a white Vermont cheddar that is just called seriously sharp cheddar, and it's like extra sharp white cheddar. I blend that with just a medium traditional yellow cheddar cheese. Those, so it'll be half a part white cheddar, half a part yellow cheddar, and then I add my Parmesan. It's almost like we worked at the same place at one point, Jeff. It seems like that, right? But I use white cheddar, yellow cheddar, and Parmesan in mine. And what I'll do is when you make your bechamel, I had a chef that came. His name was Cole. He was from Louisiana, and when he was teaching me how to make a roux, he was like, "This is completely against everything that goes." He was like, "If you're in a kitchen, you're not your grandmother. You don't have time to stand there and stir your roux for 45 minutes until it gets to the color you want." He goes, "This is the cheating way to do it, and this is the safe at home. You need a good roux, but you don't have the focus to stand there. Put it in your oven at 350 degrees. Mix your melted butter and your flour together and put it in a non-stick oven safe pan. Set a 15-minute timer at 350, and every 15 minutes go and stir your roux and literally bake your roux in an oven. It's going to take a little bit longer, but you don't have to worry about scorching it on that direct heat versus an indirect heat. It's a really easy way to make a roux. And then I do cream, cheddar, Parmesan. I
Yeah, that's
don't I don't, however, think you have to have a bechamel if you're making just a picnic mac and cheese. If you're making mac and cheese for you and your two buddies at the house, you don't necessarily have to make roux because you're dealing with so little. You can take a cup of cheese and half a cup or a quarter cup of milk and make a real basic thick cheese sauce without having to have a roux. You're negating the flavors and the profiles that come from building your bechamel, but you can execute it without one. I don't think you should, but you can.
Yeah, I like that roux technique, and I actually use that something similar to that when I'm cooking Cajun stuff, where you need a darkened roux, because that can take hours. And yeah, what you do is you just bake your flour until it browns, and then make your roux, and it saves
Mm-hmm.
you a lot of time and saves your arm. Um, But for
Bingo.
me personally, I don't think you have to use a bechamel. I think bechamel helps a lot. It does add a lot of level of flavor to it, and it the biggest thing for me it does is it helps the cheese from breaking down, right? Because if you try to just melt Parmesan or just melt a really sharp cheddar, a lot of times you can end up with a lot of oil on the top and very stringy kind of stick to the pan kind of cheese underneath, and that's not what I want in my final product. I want a very creamy sauce, and the roux and the milk combined help that cheese stay in the creamy type texture that I want it. Um, Now, if you're not going to use the bechamel, what I would recommend, and this is what you see in most homemade mac and cheese recipes, is to use creamier cheeses, right? I mean, probably the most used cheese in macaroni and cheese in the United States is Velveeta because it will not break down. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? I mean,
hydrogenated oils, my
yeah,
man.
it will not separate, and if it does separate, it just takes a little stir and it's right back to the way it was. And so I think if you use a 50% Velveeta, 50% cheddar mix, I think that's great. You can add some oily cheeses as long as you have some creamier cheeses as well. Monterey Jack is another good one that melts pretty well, that can go good with cheddar. You can get you a nice cheddar jack blend from the store. Um, but
How do
just
you
make sure
spell
you've got
cream
some,
cheese?
yeah, something like that, something creamy, like
Yeah.
that melts well to be the base, and then add some of your more flavorful oily cheeses. But you never want more than 50% oil cheese if you're going to leave out the bechamel. I personally like the bechamel. It takes a little bit longer, but I think it adds a lot of flavor, and it lets me do more with what I'm making. And that's why I just personally use it. Plus, it's the technically correct way to make it. So I like to do it that way. Should you always bake your mac and cheese, Will?
That's also like a preference. I personally, if I'm making mac and cheese and I'm making it for show, meaning I'm going to a potluck or I'm doing it for a restaurant or I'm making it for someone else specifically, I will always bake my mac and cheese. Once again, though, that goes back to adding your layers of flavor. You can make mac and cheese with just boiled macaroni, a little bit of heavy cream, and some Velveeta. That technically is mac and cheese, but it's going to be like the bare bones basic mac and cheese. I like to take it and add those levels. I season my water right. I make sure that my pasta is undercooked. I make sure that my bechamel is thickened to a point to where you get those natural nuttinesses from your roux and everything and that earthy tones without ever adding any seasoning. Then I add my cheese, and then I season on the back end because I want the flavors of the cheese to be what you taste. Not then you use your seasonings to accent that. Because in your mac and cheese, the cheese is the star. You know what I mean? Like that's why you want to use your good cheeses. So I always season at the back end so I don't cover up everything because your pasta is going to be seasoned ahead of time in the boiling water. Your roux already gets salt in it when you start your roux. So everything already has that base seasoning level to it. So then you finish with your ground mustards and your black peppers, your garlics if you add garlic to it or anything like that.
I don't think that you have to bake it. I think if you're making it for yourself, I mean, look at when people make the most commonly made mac and cheese, Kraft or Velveeta, you know what I mean, shells and cheese is not a baked product, right? I mean, just the cooked noodle with a nice cheese sauce is delicious, and it's not going to be that far off from a baked mac and cheese. But I think if we're saying should you bake it, I think you should, because even if you're just sprinkling a little cheese on the top and browning it, you're going to add another layer and dimension to it, and it's going to taste better. I mean, it really is. And you're letting that pasta and cheese sauce get to know each other a little bit more before you eat them. And so I think you probably should bake it. I don't think you have to, but I think you should. Um, what kind of ingredients can you add to your mac and cheese to make it different? It,
I had two pictures. I'm gonna switch over. I have two different types of mac and cheese that I've done that have been super successful in the past. One of which was a hot chicken mac and cheese,
oh
and
yeah.
what I did there was I don't know if you have the stream open, Jeff, if you'll be able to see it or not. I used a penne. I did my white cheddar mac sauce with the bechamel. I got it nice and thick. I didn't bake this one though, because it wasn't going to be finished in an oven. It wasn't a side. It was an entree or like a lunch portion. And what you got was the cast iron full of your white cheddar mac and cheese. And then on top, I took a boneless, skinless chicken thigh, or it done exactly like I talked about last week for fried chicken, and deep fried it, and then seasoned it and spiced it for Nashville hot chicken, sliced it, and served it on top of the mac and cheese. Because this could be, when it comes to mac and cheese, it's one of those things. It could be its own dish or it can be a side, in my opinion. If mac and cheese done right, could be an entree served like a pasta dish with topping or vegetables or anything like that. I've also done one that is a pork belly mac and cheese that was a yellow mac topped with cheese and crumbles, and then topped with little crispy like lardons. So it was like little chunks of pork belly that we would deep fried. So it would be like crispy on the outside and nice and fatty and like chewy in the middle.
That sounds delicious. I love pork belly. I think a really easy way that you can kind of jazz up your mac and cheese if you like this kind of thing is just add a little buffalo sauce to it.
Oh yeah, buffalo chicken mac and cheese.
You don't even
Love
have to
that.
add the chicken. You can just take some buffalo sauce and pour it in there, and it'll give it a whole different flavor profile. It'll still have the cheesiness, but you're gonna get that hot sauce and that little extra butter, and it's pretty incredible when you eat it like that. Your Nashville hot chicken is very similar to that. Obviously, hot chicken and buffalo chicken are different, but they're also kind of similar. I think one interesting thing I saw that I don't want to try it myself now is when you bake your mac and cheese, instead of baking it in a traditional dish, bake it on a sheet pan where it's a very thin layer and you get a lot more crispy topping, right? So it's like every bite has a ton of panko or Ritz or whatever you're using. I thought that was a very neat idea. Um, One thing that Will and I talked about on the last episode that you can always do is you can deep fry it.
Yes.
And for that, you're gonna want to make your mac and cheese. Don't bake it. Probably cool it off. Take it, make little balls out of it, bread it, deep fry it, and it's pretty neat. Really, I would recommend something to dip it in, almost like a sauce. Um, Buffalo sauce might be good with that. That you could just buy at the store or make yourself pretty easily. Ranch might be
Yeah,
pretty good
spicy
with it.
ranch or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're making your cheese sauce, another thing you can do is you can add some sort of flavor mix into it, right? So Allison in Wonderland said she uses cheddar cheese soup. I mean, you could take a soup blend and put in there. French. I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, man, I'd love to take a French onion dry powdered soup mix and just throw it into my mac and cheese and see how that came out. That sounds pretty good. Uh, you know, uh, Cheddar cheese soup mix. You could just throw some ranch seasoning in there, make your own ranch seasoning, throw that in there, throw some fresh herbs in there, stuff like that. Um, you can add vegetables to it. Jalapeno obviously is an easy choice. Uh,
Zucchini and squash is surprisingly a good pick too. You just got to make sure that your zucchini and your squash after because you'll take them and they leach a lot of liquid out.
yeah,
So after you start that, you want to par cook it, then you want to put it on a resting rack with like a towel underneath it so it'll absorb a lot of that liquid out. And if you can get that liquid to leach out of it, and then fold your roasted zucchini and squash into your mac and cheese, as long as that liquid comes out and it doesn't, mess with the consistency of your dish and make it too runny, that is a really cool texture to add to it because it adds the depth of flavor and everything from the roasted veggies, but it also gives you that counter crunch to the soft noodles. Because if you don't overcook your zucchini, you still get that little bit of crunch and bite to it. So it gives you a little bit of body without adding too much fat or protein.
yeah. I think broccoli, cauliflower, spinach, mushrooms,
I like
uh,
mushrooms.
pimentos would be a great one to add in there. Almost any vegetable you like goes good with cheese, though. I mean, you get the artichokes in there. And the same thing with meat, right? I mean, you could put crumbled up bacon in your mac and cheese. You could put chicken in your mac and cheese, ham in your mac and cheese. I like the idea of sausage in my mac and cheese. But one that's really popular, especially in fine dining restaurants, lobster.
Yeah.
Lobster mac and cheese. And on that same note, you could put crab, you could put shrimp. And when you're doing these, you're making almost like a casserole, like a main dish kind of thing where your macaroni and cheese is kind of the star of the show. You might just make one vegetable to go with it and you're kind of done. Um,
What do you think about adding like flavored cheeses like a Borzen or something that's like an herb goat cheese or something like that? Do you think venturing into, if I say, I don't want to call it a gamey cheese because the texture isn't, but when you think about like goat cheeses and some of those not cow based goats and sheep and stuff like that, they have that really rich, gamey, like it's very ripe tasting. You know what I'm talking about when I say goat cheese. It's got that
yeah,
very unique flavor. What do you think about using like a Borzen or a goat in your mac and cheese if the dish like needs it? If the story you're telling facilitates needing a goat cheese?
I personally think the sky's the limit with the type of cheeses that you use, especially if you're going with a bechamel first. I personally have put blue cheese in my mac and cheese before. Some other cheeses you might think about adding that I think would be great: Gouda, Munster, Havarti, Gruyere. I mean, that's a Gruyere is a very oily cheese, but especially if you're going to add like ham to your mac and cheese, Gruyere would be a great.
French
Uh,
onion soup mac and cheese, dude. Your
yeah.
French onion soup in there with a nice Gruyere and like crouton topping on top,
Oh
and do like a
yeah,
French onion mac and cheese. Like
yeah.
good caramelized onions mixed in throughout. It's like tons of noodles, tons of onions, lots of cheese with the Gruyere and everything. Dude, that's a hell of a dish, Jeff.
There we go, man. Hey,
French
we're
onion
gonna
mac and cheese.
we're just gonna open a mac and cheese food truck, and that's all we're gonna serve is different types of mac and
I like
cheese.
how
And
every week this episode, it's always like, dude, we need to open a fried chicken food truck. We need to open just a food truck that does nothing but collard greens and cornbread. Like,
it's because nobody else is making this stuff, and we know how good it would be, right?
yeah.
And it's like I want to eat it. So if I want to eat it, I could probably sell it, right?
Hmm.
Fontina would be a good
Also good
cheese.
cheese.
Monterey Jack, obviously we talked about that, but then you got its cousin Pepper Jack, which adds a little kick to it, right? And there's a few different types of pepper jack out there. I've seen a habanero jack that would be pretty good, I think, for a mac and cheese. Here's an interesting one that if you're looking for like a different kind of creamy cheese, maybe you don't want to make your bechamel, but I thought this would be interesting to try. Would be brie.
Yeah. Allison sent it in as soon as I could hear her frantically typing on the typewriter as she was going. And
Frantically typing 4 letters. BRIE. Yeah.
but Brie, I knew Brie would come in because I like Brie in a sense that like I get this. It's not super expensive. It's like literally just the triangle, and it's just creme de Brie, and it's like a whipped Brie that you can just dip crackers in or apple slices. I love it. So I think Brie is a perfect. Like we were talking about creamy cheeses that melt well, that would be good, that don't become too oily or separate or break your emulsification. Brie is a perfect pick for that.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier about cream cheese. And I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm making a buffalo chicken mac, what about using my cheeses as cream cheese and with a little bit of blue in there?
Yeah, cream cheese, and then you add your cheddar to give it that body and like
Yeah,
to stretch it. You're absolutely right. Because blue cheese is one of those things where when you taste the penicillin and the ripeness to it, that's the flavor profile. So you can put that blue with a cheddar as long as it's not overly sharp and pair it together, and it'll just taste like blue cheddar cheese, which
yeah, and
is really interesting sometimes.
I think the key with the blue cheese is don't overdo it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And I've done it a few different ways in the past. I've steeped it in the milk before I made my bechamel, so I'm not actually putting the blue cheese chunks in there, but I'm getting the blue cheese flavor. And then another way I really liked was put my topping on top and sprinkle the blue cheese over the top, right? So you get little chunks of the blue cheese flavor, but not all throughout it. You know what I mean? And it's more like, and you could avoid it if you wanted to, because a lot of people don't like blue cheese, and I like it in moderation. I'm not one of those people that'll take the funkiest funky and just go to town on it, but I think it has its place.
I think blue cheese is one of those things where it's either you like it or you hate it, and there's really no in between. And I think the point of using blue cheese, you're absolutely right. Blue cheese is a lot like your Pecs or your Romanos or your Parmesans. They're really, really huge with the umami flavor. So a little bit goes a long way. If you put a whole cup of cheddar cheese, you're not going to want to add a cup of blue cheese because it's going to overpower everything. That's why it's in moderation. So a quarter part blue to 1 part cheddar or something like that, because it's going to go so far.
Yeah, and what I like to think about when I'm using an ingredient like that is I want to add just enough so that somebody when they try it they say, "What is that?" But they
Yeah.
don't say, "Oh my goodness, that's blue cheese." Right? That's like it's got a wang to it, something different. What is it? But it's not like, "Dude, you put blue cheese in this. What is going on?" You know what I mean? So, start small and then, the next time you make it, if you didn't think it was enough, you can up it. But what you don't want to do with blue cheese is start with like half your cheese is blue cheese and then be like, I've ruined this mac and cheese. This is not good. And what do you like to serve with mac and cheese? Because I would say, what do you serve mac and cheese with? But we all know that mac and cheese is the star, right? So, what do you like to serve with your mac and cheese?
I think mac and cheese is one of those, like, I would call it a big boy side. Like you don't eat mac and cheese unless you're going to eat a shit ton of mac and cheese. Like you don't see people like take one little scoop of mac and it's like 2 bites of mac and cheese. Like if somebody has it on their plate, it's probably the biggest portion of whatever they're eating. So you're 1,000% right. It is the star of the dish almost all the time. I like fatty fried foods. There's no secret about that. My favorite food on the entire planet is fried chicken. So if I'm making fried chicken, there's a good chance I'm going to want mac and cheese to be with it or vice versa. I'm also a big fan of ribs. I think ribs and mac and cheese go really well together. And we didn't even get into the idea of smoking a mac and cheese.
Oh,
I've had
yeah.
great success with those in the past. Par cook your noodles, mix your sauce together, put it in your pan and set it in your, an indirect heat, like not a cold smoke, but just enough to really get it in there and let that that smokiness incorporate into your cheeses and your sauces and everything while it finishes cooking. Perfect.
Yeah, or
So barbecues,
if you want a cheater way to do that, you can add a smoky cheese, like a smoked Gouda or a smoked
yeah.
cheddar, and you can get that flavor without having to smoke it yourself for a lot of the home cooks that don't have access to that kind of stuff.
So
What
yeah,
else?
I like that's the like anything fatty, anything that has a lot of like richness to it. So good fatty foods that are going to complement that cheese and let that cheese like into that fattiness some.
Yeah, I think barbecue is a great. I mean, any kind of barbecue with mac and cheese. It's probably the most used barbecue side right alongside potato salad and coleslaw.
For sure.
Um, I'm cooking some ribs later today. I got 2 big racks I'm gonna grill off, and I'm gonna have mac and cheese with it. Pulled pork, great with mac and cheese. Brisket, great with mac and cheese. I like the little barbecue, little smokies
Mm-hmm.
with some mac and cheese. Um, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find any barbecue restaurant in the country that does not have mac and cheese as a side because of that. Fried chicken obviously is a great choice with mac and cheese. Uh, my favorite protein to eat with mac and cheese is ham.
I see that. Pork and
It
cheese always go well together.
yeah, it's got that kind of salty kind of thing going on, and I don't know, something about ham and mac and cheese just. I mean, I could do like a
It
ham
slaps.
ham roll up. You take a big piece of ham and roll up the mac and cheese in it. Just eat it like a
Yeah,
burrito. I could live that life. I mean, if you just gave me a plate with a nice Christmas ham and a big pile of mac and cheese, that's pretty much all I need, right?
agreed.
Barbecue, any kind of grilled stuff, hamburgers, hot dogs, mac and cheese, meatloaf. I think that's a
Mac and
great mac
cheese.
mac and
Yeah,
cheese, right? I think one really important thing that is good to pair it with is some sort of green vegetable, right? Obviously, it goes good with any kind of meat, but you know, it, the green vegetable adds just this little something, right? Because when you're cooking, you always want to think about balance and how do I add more. Not maybe not as many flavors as I can add to this, but stuff that complements each other and stuff that's different than what's already on the plate. So if you've got a bunch of heavy stuff, right? You got fried chicken, you got mac and cheese. What are we talking about? We're talking about fat, protein, green beans, right? It'll be a little bit lighter. Obviously, it's still protein, but it's going to add a different type of flavor with it. Roasted broccoli's good with it.
love broccoli in any capacity.
Kale, spinach, stuff like that. Just stuff to kind of balance it out a little bit. Make you at least feel like you're having something healthy on your plate, right? I mean, I'm gonna put a lot of hog in my green beans too, so I don't know how healthy they are, but it's at least gonna have a ham hock or something in there,
Bacon
right?
and
I mean,
onions guaranteed 10 times
yeah.
out of 10 in green beans.
I mean, if I just don't have the time, it's at least getting bacon, right? So maybe green beans aren't the most healthy thing, but broccoli salad, that's a healthy one, right?
I love roasted broccoli, so I will fold you just when you get it in your plate and you'll have your mac and cheese and your broccoli together. Just mix it all together. Trust me. You like broccoli and rice casserole or broccoli and cheese soups, you'll love mac and cheese with your broccoli mixed in.
Baked beans,
Oh
obviously
yeah.
on the barbecue tip there, I think is one that you really, I don't know, if you're having barbecue, what else do you need besides coleslaw, baked beans, mac and cheese? You need potato salad? Do you?
I think it's up there, but it's not you have to have one of those. You know what I mean? I feel like most of the time I was at a wedding yesterday and it was pulled pork, mac and cheese, potato salad, baked beans, rolls. Like sweet tea, everything you're just describing was what they served at the wedding we went to. And you're absolutely right. Like just a big scoop of baked beans, big scoop of broccoli and cheese. It's one of the few times where I don't mind my food touching because I'm just gonna mix it all together and eat it all together anyways.
It all touches in your belly anyway, right?
Yeah. But I don't have to
That,
look at it touching my belly.
I mean, so if you're going to a barbecue
Yeah.
and they send out a poll beforehand and they say we're only having one starch. Do you want potato salad or mac and cheese? What are you picking?
Mac and cheese, 10 times out of 10. Zero questions.
I think mac and cheese too. I'm wondering, is there anybody in the chat that's picking potato salad? I don't think so.
Let
I
us know
think
if you would pick potato salad over mac and cheese.
I think only reason you might pick potato salad is if you're worried about calories. But potato salad has a lot of calories too. Let's let's not lie about that.
Never. Al says that she'll take mac and cheese every time.
And that's not that I don't like potato salad. I do, but
I love potato salad.
mac and cheese, yeah, only if Aunt Lucy's making the mac and cheese and it's going to be from a box, then I might take the potato salad. But
Show up with the crafts to the family reunion.
I've seen some. I mean, especially like online, I've seen some terrible looking mac and cheeses. Like, I just wonder what's going on. And I feel bad for these people that they have a whole family that nobody knows how to make mac and cheese.
It's a tough one to get through when you really think about it. Like, I feel like those are one of those things you need to know how to fry chicken and you need to know how to make mac and cheese before you become an adult.
And cook eggs.
And though I know how to cook an egg, can you properly fry and scramble an egg? And I think you need to be able to do both.
At least however you like it, right? I mean, you don't have to
Yeah.
be able to cook eggs every way, but like if you like an egg over medium, you should be able to do that yourself or scrambled or whatever. And it's always shocking to me how many people like don't really know how to cook at all. I don't know if that's like a new thing, but it's like I meet so many people are like, I don't know how to cook at all. And it's like, how do you get through life? You just eat out every day? You always eat from a box? I guess they do. I mean, that's that's probably what 60% of the grocery store is stuff in boxes, right? At
I think
least.
there has to be a base. You have to have some general knowledge. I feel like part of the reasons why the American education system is failing is because they're taking these core trainings out of class because all they're worried about is standardized testing. You need a home ec class so you learn basic things like how to cook basic things. You need stuff like, basic economic tax classes that help you file your taxes. Like these are things that the American education systems are failing our people. And yes, people will say it's the parents' job to teach this stuff. It is. But in a society where both parents have to work to be able to maintain a standard of living, then the education system can't expect to do a third of the job anymore. And I
Yeah.
think them taking uh, the home ecs and stuff out of the standard curriculums was a huge mistake. And the music programs are next. So I won't
And
go into a huge tangent on it, but I feel like these are things that they're taking away from our kids.
and not everybody's fortunate enough to have both parents in their home. So it's
Yeah.
it's not easy for everybody, but one of the interesting things I find is I feel like I meet more men these days that like to cook and want to learn about cooking than I do women. I feel like it's been kind of cast off as like we don't do that anymore. And not that that's unfair. I don't think that women should have to cook. I just think it's a life skill that people should want to learn. And I often see, I don't know, it just shocks me sometimes that the amount of people that like aren't even interested in learning how to cook. Just like I don't want to do that. And I'll just have it Uber Eats every day. Like it's expensive. And
I cook almost not 7 days a week, but I cook more times than not in my home, even if it's just cooking breakfast every day. Like I will cook at least one meal every day in my home, just about.
I think that's a big reason that we have, an obesity epidemic too, is because people don't know how to cook or don't have the time to cook or don't want to cook, so they end up eating frozen pizza, stuff out of boxes, fast food, stuff like that. And as we'll tell you as chefs, that if you're eating at a restaurant, it's probably not healthy. We're probably doing a lot of stuff that's not healthy to make it taste good. It's probably going to be really high in
Tons of
sodium,
butter, tons of
lots of
butter, tons of
butter.
salt.
You're going to be eating a lot of fat. You're going to be eating a lot of carbs. You're going to be eating a lot of salt if you eat out all the time.
Hmm.
And you eat healthier if you make it yourself. It's true. Now, a lot of times when we're cooking at home, we will make some pretty unhealthy stuff.
I don't know,
But
dude. I go through pounds of butter a week.
at
Like I
least
would
we know
probably
how
say
to
at
cook
least,
healthy,
yeah.
and we can when we want to, and we use fresh ingredients. I think that's a lot of it too. Is just using fresh ingredients. I think it makes a difference. More
Agreed.
likely to get like fresh vegetables in your diet if you actually know how to cook them. As opposed to eating out of cans and boxes.
I agree. I think that the instant gratification. I say this a lot in wrestling because, of course, I'm going to figure out a way to wrap wrestling into it. The fans today crave that instant gratification, and I feel that way in food as well. Is that people want and crave that instant gratification? They're like, I want a cheeseburger, but I don't want to go buy my ground beef and my lettuce and my tomatoes and toast my buns and do all of that. So I'll just go to Chili's and order, a $15 cheeseburger, or I'll go to McDonald's and pay $3 for a double cheeseburger that's like frozen dehydrated beef that's reconstituted on a steam grill. Like it's more work to cook at home, but it is 1000% better for you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest reasons we started this podcast was to help people be interested in cooking, help people learn how to cook, learn more about food. I think it's important that as a culture we know more about our food and where it comes from, the history of our food, and how it's produced today. Because if people knew more, they would do more. You can't be what you don't know, and that's why we're here to bring you this info. Thank you for joining us this week. It's been a fun episode talking about one of my favorite ingredients, one
For
of my
sure.
favorite dishes, macaroni and cheese. We're all very judgy about it, but let's try to be understanding when people make mac and cheese, bad mac and cheese. It's probably just because they don't know how. That's probably because they've never been taught. And maybe you could find a healthy way to tell them. I don't know. You might get shot in today's America commenting on somebody's mac and cheese, but it's. I always like to introduce people when I see something. I say, "This is how I do it." I don't say anything about what they did. You know what I mean? It's just like, "Hey, this is how I do it." There's no criticism there, right? It's just like, "Hey, when I make mine, I do a bechamel. You should check it out. It's fun." Right? Something like that. You can help people. But show us your dirt. Twitter at the Dirty Belly, Instagram at the Dirty Belly, Facebook the Dirty Belly Show. If you make some mac and cheese, if you eat some mac and cheese, if you just like mac and cheese, and you want to send us a picture of you eating mac and cheese or anything that you think looks good, send it to us. We'll talk about it. Shout outs, bot shots, and chair shots at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. I did it. Yes, I got it
Nailed it.
right.
Yeah.
Tea and hot takes, 8 p.m. Eastern Time Tuesday. And of course, we've got trivia night, 8 p.m. Thursdays, all on Rivet City Radio, where you come to learn about wrestling and food and just anything, really. I mean, more stuff coming, right? Down
Yeah,
the
we've got a
pipeline,
fantasy
Will.
football show coming up this
Yeah.
fall.
I
We've
might be
got
doing a Disney show before you know it.
a
So,
Disney show. Jeff might be doing some Disney stuff. We've got trivia, botch bots, Dirty Belly. We've got nerdy news at 420. Like there's just it's like I always describe it. It's a pirate radio station for podcasters. If they don't have an outlet or a means to get their show out there, we offer them an outlet for them to broadcast on, and
yeah. And
that's what we're doing.
if you're interested, get in touch and maybe Will could find you a slot to do a show. If you got something you love to talk about, something you want to teach people. But thank you, Hungry Homies, for joining us today on our journey of learning more about the food we eat. Peace out, y'all.
Bye.
Stay hungry.
Stay hungry.